Greetings and bienvenue, midnight crew. Thank you for returning to this broadcast, and welcome to new viewers joining us for the first time. If you like a video, then feel free to subscribe.
What are some depictions of doppelgangers in different cultures? What are the most noteworthy stories, legends, myths, and otherwise about them? The fairy kin can make changeling and substitute them at birth. Usually, though, the changelings are built to die in their youth as to give the parent time to let go of a stillborn birth, or perhaps the fairykin just liked the look of the child. However, there are some folklore ways to tell if you've got a changeling child swapped out. Willful and mischievous? Ill-behaved and undisciplined? A bad seed, perhaps? Of course, we smile politely and pretend we don't notice, but we keep an eye on them while we're there, nevertheless. It could all be simply the fact that the child is very, very spoiled. Or could the little brat actually be a changeling? Countless tales as there are myth of fairy. You wouldn't think that procreation would be difficult for the fair folk. They seem to be under every rock and around every corner. Apparently, though, fairy births can be quite seldom, and often precarious. The result of an unsuccessful fey birth is a misshapen, stunted creature, destined to be completely shunned by the fairy realm, thus necessitating the old bait and switch pulled over on humans. In some cases, there is not even a sickly fey child to exchange as a changeling. Left instead in the place of a bouncing baby boy or girl as a bundle of sticks, or a log, or other inanimate object, bewitched to look like the missing infant. In a few days or weeks or years, the baby will appear to become ill and die, leaving the human parents broken-hearted, and none the wiser as to the pilfering by the fairies. Think along the lines of Pinocchio and Geppetto getting fairies to animate a doll, eventually turning the doll into a real boy. Human babies were not the only target of the fae. They were even known to take full-grown adults, leaving exact duplicate changelings in their place. While a baby could be coveted for its innocence and beauty, why would the fae want a full-grown human? Some folklorists maintain that it is for interspecies breeding. The occasional introduction of attractive new blood is thought to strengthen the fae race as a whole. Other theories take the phrase new blood quite literally. The fae would feed off the stolen human, thinking that the blood and flesh of the beautiful would be sweeter. And still others believe that the handsome adults who were taken became slaves to the fae inside their fairy mounds of earth called scythens, where the magical creatures could live eternally, unseen by human eyes. It would appear that vitality and beauty, no matter what the age of the victim, are the common denominators for the entrance of changelings, and are enough to draw the avarice of the fairies. The surest way to tell if you have a changeling on your hands is by observing the temperament of the human in question. Changelings are constantly unhappy, unfriendly, and mean. They may be very cold and aloof, and may even recoil from human touch. Changeling babies' appetites are never satiated. Their greedy little mouths will eat and eat, but it will never be enough. No matter how much they consume, they will remain weak and wizened. With adult changelings, there may be a very faint darkening of the irises, but other than that, the severe change in disposition is the only earmark you might have to alert you to the theft of your loved one. Worst of all, a family cursed with a changeling will know nothing but suffering and hardship. No luck will brighten their doorway. The greedy fae among them will devour everything in the household, including any happiness they might hope to have. So, let's say your child or loved one is definitely showing the above-mentioned signs of being an honest to goodness or badness changeling. Now what? How would you go about having your love returned to you? Apparently, the answer is to either trick or abuse the changeling to the point of divulging their true identity, and so forcing the fae to bring back the original human. How do you trick one of the most cunning and devious creatures ever known? Strangely enough, changeling fairies get a big kick out of eggshells. Either placing them about, or using them to hold water, is said to elicit an uncontrollable laughing fit, whereupon the changeling will vanish, leaving the original human in its place. Bagpipes placed by the suspected child's bed or crib is also a common trick. Fairies love music so much that a changeling, no matter how young, will be compelled to grasp the instrument and play as a virtuoso. Lastly, fire and outright battery can be used to force the fae to return the human. Some methods advocate placing the child or adult in a hot oven. Others say to hold scalding hot pokers near to the mouth while demanding the changeling state its name 3 times. Still other folklore insists that only by dunking, near drowning, the changeling in a bath of foxglove or urine is the only way to cast out the wayward fairy. In one such tale, a Swedish mother was advised to brutalize a changeling so that the fae would return her son, but she refused. To her eyes, this was still a child, and she was unable to bring herself to mistreat it, regardless of its true nature. Her husband became enraged when she would not do what had been advised to get back their son, yet she still refused. Disgusted, her husband abandoned her. As he made his way through the forest toward another town, he unbelievably came face to face with their own true son, wandering free. After a tearful embrace, the boy told his father that because his mother had not abused the changeling, and had sacrificed the thing dearest to her, the love of her husband, the fae knew that they had no power over her, and so released him and stole back their own. Another story speaks of a father to a healthy and happy 13-year-old boy. One day, the boy mysteriously fell ill, and his condition and temperament continued to worsen tenfold each day. Though his appetite increased at the same rate, he was in fact rapidly losing weight. In misery, the father confided in a very wise and respected old man in the town. The old man told him that most likely the boy had been taken by the Dawan Sith, and they had left a Sibrich in his place. Distraught, the father wondered if he'd ever see his son again. The old man instructed him to take several broken eggshells and fill them with water, then place them carefully around the hearth in the boy's room. He did so, and within no time, the boy was jumping from his bed in a fit of laughter, shouting, "I've been alive 800 years and have never seen the likes of this." Hearing that, the father pushed the changeling into the fire, and it shot up the chimney. The real boy was spit out from the fairy mound nearby at that very moment, and the father and son were soon after reunited.
An old Dutch family story, literally goes back to the middle in the 19th century. My ancestors came from a small village. One of the farmers had this weird boy. The boy would walk weirdly, flap his hands, kill small animals, yell loudly, sometimes touch girls' breasts. After getting a few beatings and warnings, the boy was kept on his father's farm, not even being allowed to enter the church. One day the boy enters the church, sobbing and confused, asking to talk to the priest. The priest and several of the local men approach the boy because he is not welcome in the church. He begs the priest to allow him to stay in the church. The priest asks him why? The boy, crying and being hysterical, says he accidentally summoned the devil and that the devil will drown him. The men of the village are hesitant and want to put the boy in a mental asylum outside the city. The boy agrees, but begs them to allow him to sleep in the church tonight, because the devil will try to drown him. The priest agrees and a carpenter goes to the city to get someone from the asylum. The boy calms down, gets a small bed, and the priest promises he will be sleeping nearby and that he can call him any time he wants to. 3 times the boy wakes up the priest, because he sees the devil waiting outside the church. 3 times the priest and the boy pray together and read from the Bible. At the end of the evening it starts to rain and small puddles form. It is almost daybreak, the priest is up already to check on the boy. The boy looks outside and says, "I did it, I won from the devil." Happy and confident, the boy says he is going to look as the sun rises. The priest goes inside to get something to eat for himself and the boy. When he walks outside to give the boy some bread and cheese, he finds his dead body, drowned in one of the puddles that formed last night.
Married. Wife's sister is married too. Her and her husband have a 12-year-old boy and an 8-year-old girl. Girl is playing in the backyard with her brother. Brother goes inside to get them drinks. Sister vanishes by the time he comes back outside. Family goes nuts. She is missing for 2 days. Spend 2 sleepless days helping them search for her in the woods and fields behind their house. Suddenly shows up outside the house. Wife happened to be there at the time. Calls everyone to get them home. Her family takes her to the ER. Filthy, stinks, a little weak but otherwise okay. She doesn't remember where she was. Bring her home after a couple days. Of course her family clings to her the next week or so. Eventually things go more or less back to normal. The girl is a little off though. Very clingy to her mom. No one really pays attention, figuring she is just upset after all that happens. After about 4 weeks of her being back, her mom collapses on her way to work. They take her to the ER. Doctors say she is extremely fatigued. She said everything was pretty normal. She slept a lot and ate right. Spends a night in the hospital and is released. Collapses again, this time at work. Spend more time in the hospital. The doctor says she might need to take some time off work. She agrees. Her and her husband decide to take a vacation. Ask if we could keep the kids for a couple weeks while they were away. Of course. Her mom is really reluctant to leave the girl. Not surprising given what happened. Kind of weird about it though. In tears as they are dropping them off with us. Just over the girl though. The boy is already upstairs playing Xbox. Don't think much of it. Couple days pass. Girl is a little strange. Doesn't want to play games with us or watch movies with her brother. Just kind hangs out with my wife. Not really doing anything. Just sitting with her. Write it off given what happened. Her mom is calling sometimes 10 times a day. Sometimes screaming and crying to talk to her. Brother-in-law apologizes for her bothering us at all hours of the night. After a couple more days, brother-in-law calls, says she is really sick, throwing up, thinks she probably ate something bad, and they'll likely cut the trip short and come home as soon as she is feeling a little better. Mentions they haven't done anything anyway because she just stays in the hotel room crying to go home to their daughter. Calls back the next day. Says she felt a little better and they were going to go ahead and stay until their original flight home. Late in the second week with the kids. Wife is coming in from the garden. Staggers a little. Falls to her knee. Made sure she was all right and asked if she wanted to go to the doctor or something. She said she just felt a little lightheaded and was fine. Insists she spend some time in bed. Little girl wants to sit in the bedroom with her. Explain she isn't feeling well and needs some rest. Kid is rather hateful about it. Whatever. Made the little shit spend the night downstairs watching cartoons and shit with her brother, and wife slept for hours. Wife spends the rest of the week not feeling so great, always a little dizzy. Brother and sister-in-law finally came home. Pick up their kids. Happy to see them go. Wife cries. Hey, it's not like we can't see whenever we want. She is really weird about it. Spends most of the night crying. Next day. Wife is insane. Wants to call off work and go to her sister's house. Totally not like her. Things get to the point I physically restrain her to keep her from going over there. Tell her she has been feeling crappy the last few days and needs to spend some time relaxing all evening. Night we fight and bicker about it. Next day she wakes up. She wants to call off again. If you feel good enough to go over there, why don't you just go to work and then visit them on the way home? She agrees. We go to work. We work in the same building. She ends up getting sick and throws up. We go home together. She is shaking and can't keep anything down. We go to the hospital. The doctor says she is showing symptoms of withdrawal and asked if she drank heavily. Never drank before. They drug test her. Nothing. She has a really rough night. Feels a lot better the next day. My wife's sister gets sick again. Collapses one evening after work. Hit her head on the edge of the kitchen table. Spent several days in the hospital. A little boy wakes his dad up one night while she is in the hospital. Said the little girl got out of bed and went downstairs. Brother-in-law freaks out and begins searching for her. She is laying in the yard. Freezing. He immediately takes her to the ER. She spent a couple days in the hospital with her mom. Eats like a moose. Perks right up after a couple days. Vaguely remembers the past month or so. Acts totally normal from then on. Her mom stops getting sick. Wife is around her without getting sick. She plays games with me and her brother when they're over. I don't think it was their daughter that came back the first time. I wouldn't venture to guess what it was, but it did something to her mom and my wife while it was around them. It made them sick, weak, and created some sort of dependence on it. Scares the hell out of me.
Here in Ireland there's still a good few people, generally older, who revere the Fae in a don't ever fuck with them kinda way. Like there are lots of little traditions, like when making poitin, think Irish moonshine, you always throw out the first bit for the fairies. Of course the science behind that is that the first bit is pure ethanol and it'll fuck you right up, but whatever. I've heard of building plans being altered as to not disturb a local fairy fort. There's even old stories like back in the day when a child with Down syndrome was born, they'd say that the fairies took the real child, since Down syndrome babies don't look like they have it for a while, I think, and they replaced it with a broken baby. A lot of the younger generations don't know a lot of this, I think, which is crazy since this stuff was so ingrained in generation after generation up till about 50 years ago.
The broken baby you're referring to is called a changeling. Fairies are fond of taking babies. The folklore seems to indicate that either fairies do not procreate as often as humans do, or else it's difficult for them to conceive or to give birth. Thus, in order to replenish their numbers, they take human babies. This is just a hypothesis, of course. Not my own, but one made by folklorists. However, fairies have a strict code of etiquette, and they never take anything without giving something in return. This is another reason why leaving out a bit of butter for them is considered good luck, since fairies believe in a fair shake, and don't take anything without giving something back. That said, stolen babies were often replaced by odd things, such as logs of wood. In the minds of fairies, this was a fair trade. More often than not, however, the stolen human child was replaced with a fairy baby. Fairy babies are notoriously grotesque. They look like wizened old men, or else they look sickly. These fairy children, however, are often blessed with the gift of the fairy sight, that is, they can see fairies. Else, they would go on to be very skilled root workers, sort of like Irish medicine men.
Here's a very cool story about changelings, and then I'll shut up. A couple in bed, with their child in the crib beside them. The husband is snoring, but the wife is wide awake. The door suddenly opens, and in walks a tall, dark man followed by an old hag. She's carrying a child in her arms. The two sink down into the chairs beside the fireplace to warm themselves. The woman is scared out of her mind, but doesn't dare move. The dark man rises and walks over to the crib. The woman is so panicked that she faints. When she regains consciousness, she wakes her husband, and they find their child gone. In its place is a hideous little wrinkled creature, grinning at them. Long story short, a strange woman shows up and tells them their child was taken by fairies. She gives them a formula for getting their child back.
Take 3 sheaves of corn up to the fairy fort. Burn each one in turn, and a dark man will show up. The fairies cannot stand against the power of fire. Tell him that you intend to burn down the fairy fort unless you get your child back.
The couple does as instructed, and sure enough, the man delivers their baby, muttering,
"Take him, by the spell of the fire and the corn you have conquered. But take my advice.
The man gives a stern look.
Draw a circle of fire around the child's cradle with a hot coal, and the fairy power will not be able to touch him anymore."
This they did, and the child grew up, and had children of his own, and grandchildren, and great-grandchildren. And it's been a long time since he's passed, but the fairy fort stands still. The family has protected it ever since.
Tales abound of babies stolen from their cradles and replaced by fairies, of women shocked to find a hideous creature lying where their newborn once slept. These fairy impostors seem to be most common in stories from Ireland and Scotland, as well as Northern Europe. Known as changelings, they were something to be feared for a great many new mothers. For anyone living in today's knowledge-rich society, it's difficult to imagine how people could truly believe that a baby could be stolen by fairies, but several hundred years ago illness and death, especially that of children, was a very real part of life, and supernatural explanations for such events probably brought a degree of comfort to people who had no knowledge of modern science or medicine. I am from a part of Europe where stories about changelings are really common. You got these told as a child while sitting around a campfire or hikes especially.
I hope that you enjoyed tonight's broadcast. If you enjoyed tonight's story, then please subscribe to the channel as more green texts will appear daily. A new broadcast will appear when the clock strikes midnight Central Time.